So hi, good morning everyone. Thank you for participating in this webinar. I am Sumit. I am from Oxford University Press and I'm your host for this webinar. And I hope all of you are taking good care of yourselves during this lockdown period. And thank you, Professor Rastogi, for uh, agreeing to conduct this webinar. And just a few I would say regulations for the participants here. So as Professor Rastogi has already mentioned that once his PPT slides, he's done with his PPT slides, then the Q&A session will start, and then the participants can put in their questions in the chat box, and then so we'll be taking questions one by one. So before we move forward, I would like to share a small introduction about Professor Rastogi first. Professor Siddharth K. Rastogi is an Associate Professor Economics at the Indian Institute of Management, Indore. He graduated with a doctoral title in economics from IIM Ahmedabad. He holds a master's degree, Applied Economics, from the University of Lucknow. His professional engagements include working on journal papers and chapters in books, attending international conferences, supervising thesis writing, and consulting for various businesses, government agencies, and NGOs. He also enjoys traveling and conducts workshops on nature watching, photography, and poetry. So thank you again, sir. And before sir starts, I would request everybody to please turn off your video mode. Maybe that might help in smoothly conducting this webinar. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sumit, for your kind introduction. And although I have posted the sort of the way of conducting the meeting, here it goes once again. So I'll be speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes, and thereafter we will open for questions. You are welcome to post your questions and in the public chat, and please no private messages and no speaking because it may distract the flow for others. It's kind of a new medium for all of us, so we are all trying to get acquainted and settling into this, right? Okay, so the Oxford University Press very kindly agreed and asked me to and agreed them for this topic of post-pandemic economy. And as the pandemic drags on into the third month almost, we are, and with no end in sight, we are obviously struggling with where to land up in the terms of economy. So let me at the onset of this say something very clearly and set something very clearly. The only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology looks respectable. This was said by John Kenneth Galbraith because, well, there are too many variables in the economy, and every single variable is subject to a lot of assumptions, subject to a lot of government policies, and many unforeseen events. For example, this itself is a black swan event, which apparently has appeared in 100 years' time, and hopefully it will not appear for another 100 or 500 years. This, whatever I'm going to say is obviously open to discussion, debate, agreement, disagreement, and many of this might be very optimistic, many of this might be very pessimistic also. So I hope that I come out to be true on the optimistic side only and not on the pessimistic side. Well, that's the hope which has been keeping us alive for the last 2 months, at least keeping us sustained for the last 2 months. So now I'm sure that these numbers, these morbid numbers have been very familiar to you by now. But if you see, so these are yesterday's numbers when I was trying to finalize the slides. Obviously, by now the numbers have increased by another few thousands. And in case of deaths, by another few, I hope as less as possible. So in case of deaths, if you see, the worldwide number has been 6.91% only. And as I understand, many of you might argue or may want to argue that some of the deaths may not be rightly reported, some of the deaths might be misattributed or hidden also. So understand this: there is something called inertia of large numbers. So some of the deaths are falsely attributed to coronavirus, and some of the deaths, a lot of deaths in fact, have been not attributed to. So when this is the case of a large set of numbers, we can always say that plus and minus almost cancel out each other, and in the ballpark we are at about 7% estimate of death of all affected people. However, if you see the numbers more closely, you will find that the death rate among the 60 plus population is very high, and the recovery rates are extremely low. Whereas below 60, the death rate is relatively lesser, and the cases are in the particularly below 40s, below 40, the death cases are extremely rare. So basically, the virus is attacking the immune system, and therefore the population age-wise vulnerability varies. This is one good news, that everybody else below 40 can easily get back to work, maintaining. So there is a point here that I'm trying to make, that below 40 people can actually easily get back to work, obviously maintaining the social distancing and hygiene practices, sanitary practices of not touching hands, not touching face, wearing face mask and all that. People above 60 are especially vulnerable, and they in no way can be a part of general workforce, general traveling, and general social interactions. So they require special care, right? And between 40 to 60, obviously a little more amount of care, a little more amount of health hygiene and immunity building practices, right? So age-wise distribution is not exactly available for all the countries worldwide. However, if you see, the country-wise numbers also vary. In fact, one reason that US has reported an extremely high amount of death rate, extremely high morbidity, is that many of the insurance companies and hospitals conservatively took every single death associated remotely, even with corona. So there is comorbidity also. There is morbidity because of corona. Morbidity because of corona led immunity loss and death by some other causes. So US very conservatively has added everything on the coronavirus itself, the COVID itself. And therefore, the US numbers are extremely high. I'm not saying that there is there is any lesser threat, but on the other hand, we see that in India, particularly, there are some states or some segments of the society which are not reported in numbers in the desirable way, and therefore, Indian data, as always, is a little lesser. It is a little lesser than what it should have reflected, and therefore, pandemic in India, particularly, is a little more horrific for us. Also, given the so a lot of people have been reading articles and arguments here and there, and a lot of people have argued that Sweden has gone for this number of testing in this. Understand, Sweden has like population of about less than 1 crore. Those many migrants daily enter Mumbai. So Sweden and all these countries are not comparable. Even US with a 42 crore population is not comparable with India kind of countries, because our land area, arable land area, habitable land area is about 40% of US, and our population is about 2.5 times of US. So there are no close parallels possible vis-a-vis India. India can be only fairly compared with the countries like Bangladesh or Indonesia, where there is a similar amount of population density, or the east coast of China, where there is extremely high population density. Nonetheless, given all these numbers, I would still say India has done tremendously well, and the death rate fortunately is a little lower in India. The good thing in this graph is that death rate has already peaked out in most countries. So progressively we will see lesser number of deaths. In fact, if you remember the 2 slides ago, the number for India's, the international death rate is 6.91%, and India's death rate is 3.37% only. So that way, India has done a lot better, right? And India's recovery rate so far is a little lesser, but that is primarily because India is following the extremely conservative practice of 14-day quarantine after recovery, 14-day further quarantine practice, which is after recovery not followed by most countries. So that way, India's recovery rate is underreported, whereas death rate, I hope, is the rightly reported. Although I know that there are some deaths omitted in this, a lot of states and some segments and so on has not been reporting right way. Therefore, we can safely assume that India's death rate is much below the global average, much below the worst affected countries of China, Italy, Spain, UK, and US, the top four, the top five worst affected countries. Uh, in this, there is one more good thing. If you see the proportion of population that is affected, India's numbers are extremely low. Like 50,000 could have been affected had there been no lockdown. 50,000 could have been affected in just a single mega city of, let's say, Mumbai or Delhi kind in a week's time. So that way, India has been able to spread the curve, what is known as these days flatten the curve. India has been extremely successful in flattening the curve so far. And given the Indian public policy's historical record of immense amount of failure and confusion, this is actually a great success that we have been able to contain the numbers below 50,000 till yesterday, till 2 days ago, and it has crossed 50,000 only on the 23rd day of 10,000 numbers, which is just 5 days for the US and 11 days for Italy. So that way we have outperformed even the developed countries' health system and social distancing practices and so on, which is actually very, very surprising and unexpected in case of India. Nonetheless, the peak in India is supposed to appear, as per the epidemiologists and economic forecasters, the peak is supposed to appear during the June-July period. That means this number may easily cross about 500,000 in by the end of this month. This will be a scary scenario because we may not have the sufficient hospital capacity, and by that time the social patience may start evaporating as well. Nonetheless, I would like to point out one good thing here is that the green line on the top is the recovery rate, and the orange line at the bottom is the death rate. So if you see in March to April 3rd period, that was the duration of the just before the first lockdown, and by the middle of the lockdown, of the first lockdown, our death rate peaked and started to fall. By April 11th or so, our death rate was falling. Remember this piece of information because we will make use of this. Before even the end of the first lockdown, if you carefully see, this is almost April 7, 1 week before the first lockdown ended, our death rate started to fall and our recovery rate at the same time started to increase, right? 7th April, remember this, our death rate was falling 1 week before the first lockdown. We will make use of this information very soon. Obviously, the states level performance has varied, and some of the states have performed much better than others. In fact, my personal understanding, reading of the public policy and response has been very much in favor of particularly 2-3 state governments. Till a week ago, Odisha was, despite all odds, Odisha was doing extremely good. Despite the apparent poverty in the state or lack of resources, Odisha had outperformed the much better and richer states, maybe because their experience in handling the crisis and a long and stable government of 15-20 years government experience and administrative stability definitely has helped Odisha. Same way, Telangana has outperformed many other states, comparable states, probably because the chief minister had took very strong steps in the very beginning and probably he had the groundwork laid out for that strong handling of the crisis, thanks to the 4 or 5 months old strike by the transport workers in Telangana, which he handled very strongly. So because of those kind of strong administration, so local strong administration and not the central administration. See, health and policing both are the state subjects. I mean, concurrent and majorly state subjects. So that way, center might lay out the guidelines and broad directions. However, the ground level handling is by the states only. So that way, I would say Odisha, Telangana, UP, these three states particularly have defied all the expectations of extremely bad performance historically and have extremely well performed. On the other hand, Maharashtra, which has been known for being one of the richest states and handling crisis much better, has utterly failed in handling the same level of crisis and has reported much higher death rates as well as infection rates. So again, the local administration, the state administration has probably played a lot bigger role in the success or the failure of the pandemic control efforts. Now, some of the economic numbers. So this is so far the background of the disease itself, the pandemic itself. We'll look at some of the good or the bad things now. So see, the government responded very early, approximately April beginning, with a fiscal stimulus of about 1%, 1.7 lakh crores. Many people criticized that stimulus as very insufficient. However, we need to understand that it was the initial phase and government was also at a loss of the extent of the economic shutdown. For example, the April collection of GST, which used to be and should have been about a 1 lakh crore amount, has fallen to 5,000 crores. Like, your tax base has always been small. People have not been paying taxes. This is indirect tax, and even there has been leakages despite 2 years of GST. And GST monthly collection from 1 lakh crore has fallen to 5% of the actual amount, supposedly. That is 5,000 crores only, right? This is the amount of shrinkage in the tax collection. 5% tax only has been collected. Now, given that, how much fiscal space does the government has is also very much open to debate, questioning, argument, and so on. Now, comparable pandemic affected economies, not real in GDP per capita terms, but in the pandemic impact, USA has given a fiscal stimulus, fiscal plus monetary stimulus, that is the quantitative easing to the tune of $2.5 trillion. But there are some caveats, and as a result of that, it comes to the 6.7. So it appears to be 10%, but because of some promises only, not actual delivery, it comes to 6.7% of the GDP of US. And same is the case with UK's 3.7%. However, if you add the monetary steps and the size of monetary push in the Indian economy, that adds to the that comes out to the 3.9% of GDP. So if you add 1% of fiscal and 3.94% of monetary stimulus, it comes out to be about 5% push in the GDP. Yet it is not sufficient, and a lot of people have been asking for about a 10 lakh crore package. Particularly, Devesh Kapoor and Arvind Subramanian have been pretty vocal about the Arvind Subramanian was the ex-chief economic advisor. So a pretty familiar name. Devesh Kapoor is an Indian economist based out of US. So they have argued for a 10 lakh crore stimulus package, and they have not drawn the number from thin air. They have given the detailed methods of drawing that also. It's not necessary that I would agree with all of those, but they present interesting insights. So one might search for their inputs. Now, the RBI package has several problems, although I'm not saying that 3.9 crore, 6.5 lakh crore has all been ascertained or distributed in the economy, because it was coming with a lot of caveats. For example, 50,000 crore for mutual fund sector only, 50,000 crore for corporate debt only, of which actually should have been, most of that should have gone to the small and medium scale enterprises, whereas most of that has been cornered by the larger corporate bodies, including 10,000 crore by Reliance, which is already sitting on a cash pile. So probably they wanted to retire their costlier old debts and take a newer, lesser costly debt and so on. Whatever be the reasoning there, but that was not a hopefully part of the plan, right? And yet, despite the initial stimulus in India, fiscal and monetary both, a lot of space remains for further set of stimulus. The good thing in India's growth numbers is one more, that while the economy in most countries has contracted, that is, economy has shrunk in most countries, in India, it is still showing a growth of positive numbers, 1.6 to 2%. The worst estimate presented so far is 1.6% by IMF. So that way, India's economy is still showing some positive signs, which is actually a great relief that it is not shrinking, at least, unlike the Chinese economy, which has apparently shrunk by 6.5%. The infection numbers I have already talked about, they are very well under control. And the best part about Indian society, which has been known so far to be very unruly, ill-behaved, uncivic, lacking in basic civic sense, the great thing that has come out in the time of crisis is that there has been a great social cooperation, and uh, great social cooperation in the form of, you might have noticed that, so far at least, and hopefully it will continue, there are no riots for food. There are no killing, riots, theft for food, and there are no starvation deaths. And people have broadly, not everyone obviously, but people have broadly followed the rules of social distancing. They have broadly followed the rules of the lockdown, and it's given the kind of image our society has had. In fact, Indian society has outperformed the Australian, US, UK, or most of the Western societies where there were, fist fights for toilet paper. So that way, Indian society has shown a much higher and better moral character. Obviously, it is not, it cannot be the defense for a longer lockdown, and I will come to that. The green points were the good points so far. However, there are a lot of red points also. The first red point is that there are unemployment estimates ranging up to 26%. These are unofficial estimates. These are coming from CMIE only. CMIE has been very critical of the government for the past some time, and therefore there are reasons to uh, believe that these numbers might be inflated. However, there is no details of this 26% given, that how one arrives at this number, what is the basis of saying this 26% is unemployed. That's almost as high as Great Depression United States number. 1931 US had the same unemployment number of 25%. So there is no certainty that how one has arrived at this number. However, even if the number is a little lesser, and let's say even 10%, for an emerging economy, for a poor economy like India, even 10% unemployment rate is extremely scary. So 26% will do obviously a lot more bigger and longer damage. The PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, is at about 27, again from the same source, CMIE. Purchasing Manager Index, for the unaware, just a quick primer on PMI. So the manufacturing sector managers place their purchase of orders. PMI is the index of those orders, Purchasing Managers Index, whether they are ordering more, whether they are ordering less. So if the PMI is at 50, that means the manufacturing sector, which is the basically nerve and blood of the economy, the real sector of the economy, the physical sector of the economy, it means that if the PMI is at 50, it is stable economy. If PMI is more than 50, it is expanding economy, expanding in few quarters or months. If PMI is less than 50, it means the economy has a risk of shrinking in future months. That means PMI at 27 is an extremely bad news, because economy might shrink very soon. So far what the positive growth numbers has been proposed they might turn negative in the coming months, maybe coming quarters, if not immediate months, right? And PMI therefore is a scary number. Below 50 is bad, 27 is scary. There are certain sectors which have faced a lot of stress. For example, some of the sectors may not realize it immediately. However, let's take one very simple example. Let's say auto sector, automobile, let's say passenger cars. In China, when the lockdown opened, the cars suddenly saw a rise in demand. The rise in demand was on the account of people became very skeptical of public transport, and they wanted to maintain a higher social distance. So everybody who could afford a car started buying a car. So there was a sudden spurt in the demand for cars. Now look at India. Indian auto industry is robust, strong, not facing the crisis of liquidity. However, auto ancillary sector, the spare parts that are supplied for the cars, they are mostly MSME. And you cannot sell a car until and unless all the parts of the spare or all the parts of the car are available. So let's say you are able to procure and set up the entire car, but just one small part, let's say the the uh, the rear view mirror or the the rubber on the brake pedal, that is not available because that one particular firm that was supplying to you earlier has gone bankrupt. Then your entire car is useless because one critical component is no longer easily available. Because of that, the entire sector may fall into stress, and that means every sector is as strong as the weakest link of their entire supply chain. Now, most of our supply chains are dependent on Chinese supplies, one way, in one place or the other. Some critical components for almost all industries come from China. So therefore, till that resumes, almost every sector will have half complete inventory. And that is a very real reason for problems. The state has been ineffective in some cases, particularly district administration has been failing a lot of places to effectively impose the lockdown, and some people have, for example, this Delhi Tablighi Jamaat event, people spread all over India and spread virus at an alarming rate. That could have been the first spike in India, otherwise our lockdown could have lasted till 14th April only. And that is my next point. If you remember, I mentioned initially the 7th April, India's death rate started to fall. My understanding is that the Indian state should have taken an account of the situation between 7th to 14th April only and started easing the first lockdown on the 14th April onwards period only. And there is a reason to that. If you see, on May 3rd, this was the situation of India's districts. That the district distribution out of 733, only 18% were in the red zone, 43% in the green zone. These districts could have been allowed to continue their business with certain amount of social distancing hygiene practices. So when I'm saying as usual, it means now the norm in the world is going to be basic hygiene practices and social distancing must be applied. The population distribution wise, obviously the 18% red districts are much larger and bigger districts like Mumbai and Delhi and Jaipur and Ahmedabad, more densely populated, and therefore they had 44% of the population. But that is no reason to punish the remaining 56% of the population with stricter controls. In fact, that just spread the distress a lot longer. And GDP wise, by the way, these 44% population produces 52% of the GDP. So we could still have rescued 48% of the GDP from the other districts. Not 48% entirely, let's say 20% loss even there, but still 40% of our GDP could have been continuing as usual, which was not permitted. And therefore the problems. Now, if you look at my criticism to the national lockdown and remember the 7th April and 14th April dates, you'll realize something very interesting. So, I mean, by now everybody would be familiar with the three phases of the lockdown. The first phase ending 14th April, extended to 3rd May, and then finally with certain ease out on 17th till 17th May. Now, it is expected that 17th May will easily increase for another 14 days, if not more, till almost 31st May. It's a given. And June, July may also see partial lockdowns, particularly in the red zones. However, step back for a second and ask, what is the purpose of a lockdown? How long can we hold the lockdown? Uh, the pandemic treatment might be 2 years away, might be forever not known, but the earliest estimates are minimum 1 to 2 years. Can we really hold a lockdown for that long? Unless we decide to go and live like a caveman and growing fruits and wheat and in our backyard, or rearing cows in our backyard. Unless we start deciding that, we cannot sustain a lockdown longer than May perhaps. In fact, this is already longer than necessary. And if people are arguing for more stringent lockdown or something, ask them or ask yourself, has the risk of infection eroded? It has not. Therefore, what is the purpose of the lockdown? My understanding is the purpose of the lockdown was, is, and should have been, simply put, to make people aware that it is a deadly disease, it is a problematic disease, to maintain social distance, to maintain hygiene practices. Don't step outside for frivolous reasons. Don't go for long drive or outing. Don't choke the places, and so on. Was the message understood in the first lockdown period itself? Yes, it was understood in the first period of lockdown itself by all those who are intelligent enough to follow the basic rules of civic sense. Those who have not understood in the first phase will not understand and rush for the liquor shops and rush for just seeing the sky at the first instance. So for them you require police, but you don't require police, you don't require policing efforts to control those who have a higher civic sense, who have a better civic sense. And therefore, the purpose of lockdown is totally lost. Most people have started behaving or assuming that there will be a day when lockdown ends, and on that day we will have the vaccine, or we will have the vial for treatment of the virus. That is not going to happen easily. The purpose of the lockdown is to maintain hygiene practices, maintain social distance, control the spread. Another important point, look at what is the total capacity of treatment available. Apparently, keeping some capacity for normal diseases, other diseases, heart patients, accident cases, and so on, India has almost 1 lakh bed capacity for treatment of coronavirus patients itself. 1 lakh emergency beds, ventilators available. And I'm not counting the freshly created capacity. This is existing capacity as of beginning 2020, approximately February. I'm not counting the freshly created or converted hospitals or makeshift beds or makeshift ventilators by auto sector and so on. I'm not even counting those. The idea of a lockdown is to flatten the curve, which started flattening by 7th of April, if you remember my previous graphs. The purpose of the lockdown was to control the numbers within the beds available capacity. That means up to 7,000 people a day, because 7,000 into 14 days of treatment gives you almost 98,000. That is 1 lakh people, 1 lakh beds. That means we can afford up to 7,000 patients a day. However, because of a very stringent lockdown, in fact, there is an Oxford University paper only, which 3 days ago I read on Financial Times, a summary of that actually, which says that India has the world's strongest, strictest lockdown. Whether that is necessary, lockdown is necessary. So strict lockdown for so long period, perhaps not, because the virus is not going anywhere by mere lockdown, right? So the idea is this: let the infection run in a staggered and controlled manner to reach herd immunity. Therefore, 7th to 14th April was the period when we should have stopped the lockdown, divided the districts in red, green, orange, or whatever color scheme you like, gray, blue, white, black, and many more colors. And then let the district administrations try to control this at a local level itself, whereas let the state economies try to go back to normal. For example, the northeastern states and Goa have 0 cases, and yet they are suffering from the lockdown because everybody else is also around them locked down. Most of the districts in most of the states are also free. We have seen those district numbers, 43% or so districts are totally free, and yet they are locked down. So we have been over enthusiastic about the lockdown and over strict about the lockdown, and that is a fundamental problem of mindset. If I may say, future is always something like this. I'm sorry, this is in Hindi, but this is from a directive issued by the UP government. So what UP government has done is, if you look at number 9 to 12, they say that sweet shops, bakeries, and food shops, fruit, vegetable, medical stores, groceries, these can open on a daily basis from 7 to 5:30. Whereas Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, that is alternate days, MWF, all the hard wares like cycle, iron, sanitary wares, hardware, automobile, utensils, all those can open on MWF. Whereas the clothes, printing, goggles, stationery, furniture, jewelry, cosmetics, all these can open on TTS basis, the Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday basis, right? This is a much more desirable way of reducing the density of marketplaces, reducing the crowds in the marketplaces, and in the meanwhile, maintaining social distance, installing sanitizers everywhere, providing hand washing facilities, insisting on hand washing, not handshaking kind of practices. And this is going to be a very long-term civilizational impact, or rather a human species level change. That is, we will have to behave this way only. There is no other short-term quick remedy possible, right? This has to be in this way only. Now, moving on to some risky area. Okay, so I'll start taking questions after 1 or 2 slides. These are although very crowded slides, so I'll just go a little faster. If I look at the sectoral level, my understanding is that although a lot of people have been arguing that this will lead way for the unorganized and informal sector and staggered, the spread out economy and small units, they don't realize that small units do not have the credit capacity. They cannot withstand the pressures of the formal economy or the black swan events of this sort. Therefore, my understanding is that unorganized and informal economy will shrink, and there will be progressively lesser space for MSME sectors owing to their lack of scaling up and quality assurance. So they will have to scale up, and therefore the micro will become small, small will become medium, and medium will have to expand into a large enterprise. And the scaling up plus quality insistence both would be necessary very soon. With more organized businesses this sort, demand for skilled labor will also grow. And when the demand for skilled labor grows, because a small bakery or a small shop somewhere can work with half-trained labor, but a proper organized chain has to. So, for example, a grocery shop employs anyone who walks into the shop and says, "Yes, I'm willing to work for food and 100 rupees a day." Whereas Big Bazaar or Reliance stores have to train the individual in certain skills. Now, take this to the formal Maruti garage versus a local repair shop and every other possible example. So the demand for better level of skills and better quality of skills will grow. And that is where my big hope is, that so far India has been pushing for educational degrees. I hope, although it will probably go against my own sector of education, organized education of IIMs, but I hope that the insistence for uh, degree seeking reduces and skill seeking increases. If skill seeking increases, then there will be lesser need for formal degrees. And by that way, the Coursera, edX, or online courses will find a bigger market. I want to become a programmer. I don't need to be an engineer. I will do 10 courses on Python, R, whatever Java coding, Java or C++ coding necessary, and I will become a master of just one kind of coding. I think that's a far superior model instead of a resource intensive 4 years or 2 years of education, which is, most of you will probably cynically say, yes, it is useless, although it is not that useless, but given the amount of resource intensity, it is not that useful also. Some of the sectors may face extreme duress because of the credit issues. The credit may not be extended infinitely. They may not be able to maintain a cash flow. In fact, I come from a business family, mostly middle scale, medium scale businesses, and most of them, the factories that my relatives, family, friends, they have, most of them are struggling with cash flow issues. So they might have a machine, but they cannot give machine in salary or payment. So they are struggling with credit from the bank, which is not available easily because of banks demanding collaterals and so on. And they are already fully leveraged. And they cannot scale up also because the demand as well as the production capacity is not easily available. So if the credit and cash flow issues continue, not only the MSME and small businesses, traders, logistic, critical supply chains will suffer. The banks and NBFCs will also face a problem because their NPAs will escalate. If I cannot run my business, I cannot pay back my loan, I am bankrupt. Whatever you want to take away. So you can enforce insolvency and bankruptcy code, but that will ruin the business. You will get some residual value, do whatever with that, whatever you want. And if that happens across the economy, the banks and NBFCs can also not be able to sustain. NBFCs are, by the way, hugely dependent on MSMEs. However, there is a some silver lining there. That is, it may spell a demand boom for some sectors. For example, medical and sanitary supplies, insurance, digital economy. Obviously, the list can be longer. I'm just quickly going over demand lag. That is, with a certain lag, these demands will pick up another 6 months or so. These demands may pick up, like electronics, apparel, jewelry, toys, baby products, and so on. And some sectors may face a very long-term demand doom. For example, airlines. Now, airlines may not face a demand doom per se, but airlines require a lot of running resources. They cannot be grounded for 3 months. And on the top of that, DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, telling the companies that although your planes are parked and you are not allowed to run your business, you are still supposed to pay the full amount of parking fee, which is approximately 30 to 50,000 rupees a day. You are still supposed to pay that amount of parking to the airport owners. So airlines and all may face extreme high pressure of, so if you have airline share, basically get out of those sectors. That's what I'm essentially saying. They are risky. Warren Buffett has gone out of airlines. So understand what the level of crisis can be. Tourism, hospitality, hotels, real estate, these might face a very long-term doom. Auto sector also, because a lot of people may not be willing to or able to buy the cars, particularly in India. More importantly, auto sector may not see a revival because there may not be any demand. For example, if people work from home becomes a norm, 4 lakh employees of Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, and Tata has already said 75% of them will be working from home. If 75% of TCS does not travel, imagine Bangalore roads will be a heaven. right? But auto sector demand might diminish. So Maruti or TVS might face the heat of the new demand might simply evaporate from the auto sector. Now, what government can do and shall do. This is my last slide where I'm speaking. After that, I'll take questions. Just maybe 4-5 more minutes. Government has to, although we have not done this since after setting the Reserve Bank autonomous, we have not monetized the fiscal deficit. But for a change, 23 years later, I would argue for monetization of fiscal expansion. In your macroeconomics textbook, this was written as seniorage. The risk of debt inflation as well as retail inflation are both short-term only, and those can be recovered when the economy is recovered. Now, Government of India has committed a lot of 1 lakh crore in this fiscal itself and 5 lakh crore over a 3-year period. Capital expenditure. I understand that it is necessary for capital asset creation, capital expansion, capital capacity creation, and so on. However, if the projects are not close to completion, they can be simply halted for another year. We have waited for 70 years. What is one more year? However, at the same time, we need to divert that capital expenditure towards the revenue expenditure side, but not necessarily on the salaries and perks of the government employees and so on, but rather a time bound. So you would remember there was a 6,000 rupees per quarter payment for the marginal farmers, small and marginal farmers. Same can be extended to Jan Dhan accounts and BPL population. Obviously, our challenge is to keep them alive and safe for the time being, safe from starvation and some demand creation, and eventually it will pick up in the other sectors also. The main thing I would argue for the MSME sector is to issue a Mudra 2.0. So there was Mudra scheme, which was for the loans, micro loans of up to 10 lakhs. We can do the same thing on a small collateral. We can do the same thing for MSME units also, where the loan size, ticket size can be 1 crore, 2 crore, or 5 crore. And that might revive the whole, or at least save the whole MSME sector, which is the major employer as well as major supply chain critical link also. Now, we have been hearing about the bank cleaning, NPA cleaning for very long. Every crisis comes with, a golden line, a silver line also. And that silver line can be that a harsh action can be taken at this time in the name of countering the crisis. So consolidate your banks and NBFC instead of having 20, 30, 50 small bodies, have just 3 or 4 mega mergers of banks and NBFC's balance sheet cleaning up, clean up the NPAs, whether you waive off, write off, which are 2 different things, by the way. A lot of people and celebrities are confusing that these days. Waive off, write off, reconstruct, or give a principal waiver, one-time settlement, whatever is possible. But try to keep it out of the judicial system, which is going to take 20, 30 years because courts are not answerable to anyone. In fact, that is where some of my next points will come to there also. Nonetheless, for the time being, we have to focus on job creation at district cluster levels. See, so far what we have been doing is we want to increase, let's say, jobs, make more things in Mumbai. We want to increase IT sector, invest more in Bangalore. That is not how it is going to work, because then almost everyone will have to migrate to those 2-3 places, kill those cities also in the process by traffic, by water demand, by pollution and everything. The idea is there are 55 cities in India which have 1 million or more population. However, are there 55 major economic centers in India? No, there are only 12. So the idea is invest in those 55 cities which are actually very well spread. For example, there are 5 such cities in UP, 5 such in Tamil Nadu. So invest in those more than million plus cities, and they are regionally well spread. Insist on those developing certain industrial capacity, district cluster level capacity. So work on not single districts, but rather a district cluster. For example, Indore, since I'm sitting here right now, Indore becomes the district cluster for development, or district industrial development for 4 or 5 districts nearby. and the hub and spoke model is exercised. Obviously, hub and spoke will be a little more capital intensive in the long run, but in the short run, it will save a lot of jobs. And this will curb the migration also, but not in the same old 70s way where certain sectors were reserved for MSME. I saw some economists arguing for reserve some sectors for MSME. That will again kill the entire economy. Please don't go by the forced reservation, but rather let the market forces take over and try to remove the restrictions for the land, labor, and legal tangles. Beautiful news is that Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh both have relaxed the labor laws. Madhya Pradesh has also gone ahead and removed a lot of agricultural constraints. For example, if you are an industrialist, you don't need to sell your produce locally. You can export it, sell it anywhere you wish. However, all over India, 1972, Indira Gandhi introduced a rule called APMC. The rule is basically agricultural marketing committees. The rule is that farmers can sell their produce in the agricultural produce marketing committees. Farmers can sell their agricultural produce in the local mandi only. Even if there is another district where I'm getting the better price, I cannot sell it there. And even if my crop is not perishable, if it's a cash crop, even then I cannot. So I'm captive to the local mandi. APMC law was relaxed in 2003 by NDA first government. However, now it has been almost made negligible in Madhya Pradesh. I hope that this state level reforms are taken further, like Rajasthan about 6 years back did. UP is trying to do, and Madhya Pradesh is already taking the lead in that. So some of the restrictions are removed, not only from businesses, but from agriculture also. And resource redirection by credit, by finance commission, by law against certain freebies are made so that growth oriented sectors get certain priorities. For example, textile and so on. Textile firms, for example, in Bangladesh get a loan at 2%. In India, the same is at 8%, despite one of the most employment friendly and agriculture friendly sectors. Textile does not get any good treatment in India, and we are losing market to Turkey, Bangladesh, and China on that. So government has to identify certain priority sectors also, not by force, but by rather the market forces, and making businesses easier. And so many licenses. For example, Madhya Pradesh has done another thing to get rid of this bureaucratic nanny state. The days of the Service Guarantee Act, Guarantee of Services Act has reduced the firm registration time from 30 days to a single day. That means you can start a company in Madhya Pradesh in a single day, unlike before, which was 30 days time period. Right? One day is the Singapore benchmark, by the way. So you can start a company in a single day by giving all the self-certifications and so on. So that sounds a golden opportunity again. However, at the same time, a lot of people are thinking that Chinese manufacturing firms will simply roll over and come to India. For your kind information, China has already started taking over, and a lot of supply chains are already shifting to China because China has recovered faster and started open businesses faster. So an infinite lockdown, a longer lockdown will damage only our chances for countering the challenges that China poses. And the end message in a single line again is that without creating wealth, we can only distribute poverty, right? So I'll look up the chat messages. There are 64 messages.
So what I'll do is I've noted many of these questions. I'll read those questions out to you. And
sure,
then,
that will be great, Sumit.
Sure, sir. So the first one is from Soumya Mukherjee. Which industrial sector is mostly affected, and what are the primary measures being taken to revive the SMEs?
So, Soumya, as of now, there are no steps being taken for any specific sector. Rather, there is a staggered opening up of the sectors that is going on. However, the general idea is that the banking and NBFCs are the worst affected in the services, and in the manufacturing side, it is steel, auto, and allied sectors like auto ancillary, rubber, plastic, and so on. So there is no specific steps, but see, economy is like a chain. So everything is related with each other. So you cannot revive just one sector at a time and assume that everybody else will take care So it's like, you have 10 children, you have to feed all the children at all the times. You cannot simply say that today I'm feeding one, in the evening I will feed another, fifth day the 10th child will be fed. By that time the 10th child will be dead, right? So we cannot simply uh, take one sector at a time. Yeah, Sumit.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So yes, this one is from Doris Selvaratnam, and the question is: should economy prepare for higher 4IR slash IoT? I guess this IR is Industrial Revolution. IoT, I'm pretty sure this is
Yeah.
related to thing.
So fourth industrial revolution is stepping in India in bits and pieces, and this bits and pieces of fourth industrial revolution are much more misunderstood, and that is where my point of instead of degree focus, get the skill focus, because I industry 4.0 is basically skill oriented. It doesn't matter whether you have the degree or not. However, so we have to let go of our degree focus. And I4 Industry 4.0, I hope makes more headwinds in India. However, at the same time, the risk is that it is not so employment friendly, not so labor friendly also. So we have to discover new sectors of employment of labor also. So it's a double-edged sword. It's good as well as bad at some level.
Mhm.
Yeah, Sumit.
So exactly this, the follow-up question was how can they will also be, this will also imply higher unemployment, and how can the workers prepare themselves for this? So you already.
Workers have to reskill. We have to discover new sectors. For example, in 2015 onwards, Modi government has been trying to push for the things like tourism sector. Tourism is one of the most employment intensive and least polluting sectors. Employment intensive in the sense of every million rupees can create about 4 times more job in tourism rather than in other services, and about 8 times more job than manufacturing. So tourism kind of services were promoted. However, with this pandemic, tourism is the worst sufferer also. So obviously we have to find out new ways and means. It is like, in how will the world look like in 2020? If you ask somebody in 1920, they will probably say flying cars. Uh, Now you cannot really guess what is going to unfold in future in what way. So IoT, for example, is revolutionizing medical care and old age care. Same way, what shape will be taken is probably, at least I'm not the expert on that, and I won't venture into more uncharted territory. So yeah, so Sumit.
Yeah, sir. So the next one is from Jitendra Patolia, and the question is: what are the financial aids provided by government for middle-level income people? Don't we think that this income level people are finding problem as the salaries might not be paid?
Right. This is a problem. In fact, government and large corporates are able to sustain their salary bills, but most of the MSMEs, traders, small businesses, shopkeepers are suffering from the problems of not only salaries, cash flow maintenance, particularly. Because, for example, if I am a small shopkeeper in a cloth shop merchant or an apparel shop in some city, middle class city, and I may have a stock full in my shop, but I don't have any cash to run and I cannot pay with jeans for my daily milk bill. So those are the kind of problems. That is why government has to bring in Mudra 2.0 kind of where liquidity is provided to from the organized sector at cheaper rates with some small collateral. So I can say this is my shop, this is my stock worth 10 lakh rupees. I'm taking a loan of 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs or 20 lakhs. Mudra has that kind of flexibility, and I will return this principal at a very throwaway interest rate. So government has to pull down the interest rate. At the same time, obviously, the interest rate push down on savings will also reduce, and that might be a dampener on the saving rate, which is already very low. And therefore, again, there is a trade-off. And first lesson of economics is always there are trade-offs. You cannot have a free lunch. You cannot have a cake and eat it too. So there has to be, if you are getting a cheaper loan, you have to get rid of your costlier fixed deposit interest rates also. It will have to work that way only. Yeah, Sumit.
Yeah. So this one is from Anil Yadav, and I think you might have received this question a number of times. Is it the right time to invest in the stock market?
The right time to invest in stock market is always the last week. I don't know. I mean, nobody has ever made money in casinos and stock markets. So decide for your own time. See, it depends on your priorities also, how long you want to sit. You are a day trader, or you are sitting for 3 months, you are making a quick buck, or you are diversifying your portfolio, you are sitting for 3 years. It depends on your own preferences, how much liquidity you have, what is your amount, what is the return you are looking at. So I can't really say.
Okay, sir. And the next one is from Shreya Arora, and this is how will the scenario for the startup organizations change?
So startups, it depends what kind of startups are those. Mostly in India, in the name of startups, I have seen either making a small app with big claims or a food shop of different kind. Both of these might not find many takers. So a startup which has some larger applicability, a startup which can solve a real life problem, which is always the case by the way for success, and a startup which is able to generate some kind of traction. I know this is a very generic and kind of flimsy answer, but these are the type of startups which will gain. In fact, one good thing is that with a lot of companies rolling back the employment offers from IIT, IIM, and many other colleges also, a lot of people might be forced towards entrepreneurship and putting their skills for a better use, or testing their skills which are not so efficient yet. So yes, but entrepreneurship is going to be a much bigger and accepted norm in the society. Another caveat at this point, the entrepreneurship successful rate, startup success rate is 2% only. So out of 100, only 2 companies will succeed. While you are thinking of startup, remember that also. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. The next one is from Tanvi Jain, and she's asking, how long will we be able to again be back on our steps and take over our supply chains, which have been acquired by China?
The earliest, best, and most optimistic estimates are this year end. 2020 is definitely gone. In just reclaiming what was there earlier, just to come back to the normalcy. It's a massive ailment. It's like viral fever. You can cure it in 3 days, 5 days, but after 7 days, even some weakness remains. So that weakness will remain in the economy for this year at least. This is the optimistic estimate. If the peak in India of the virus is yet to arrive, if the situation worsens, it goes out of control, or some social unrest or some idiotic thing, otherwise riot or something happens, then it is very much possible that another year. So the pessimistic estimate is about 2022 will also be. So Harvard Business School, by the way, is preparing for 2022 end of the problem. I'm optimistically saying 2020. Yeah, so
Yes, sir. This one is from Ms. Vishali, and she's asking, so consumer essential goods have a greater demand during lockdown, and how can this exist if lockdown extends? As people started spending from their for their consumption from savings rather than income. So,
yeah. So sorry, Sumit, you were saying something else also.
so yeah, I think what she means is if the lockdown extends, then eventually people
Right.
would have less money to spend on these essential goods.
Uh, See, the thing is, everybody is trying to spend in a very cautious manner. And even if, let's say, government employees' salary is coming, they are not going out and buying luxury items or apparels or cars or scooters, whatever they can. Even if, let's say, even if the showroom is open, even then they are not. Same way, even when the lockdown opens, a lot of people are going to save this experience, and this experience is going to dictate our behavior towards not exactly minimalism, but yes, spend in the very cautious manner, and don't spend on frivolous things. Don't do impulse purchase, something like what our grandparents used to do. You like something in the shop, you just go and buy it. It's not going to happen that way. At the same time, it is also likely that e-commerce will further increase because people may not want to go out in the market and rather start buying online. At the same time, online return that I will order 5 sizes from Myntra and keep the size that fits and return 4, that might kind of may start. So e-commerce is definitely pegged for a big boom. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes. So I've been getting similar questions on this thing. So, sir, what do you feel about the Indian education, how it would evolve due to this pandemic? Because nowadays, you being a professor yourself, there are a lot of online teaching going on, and people are also going for certification courses, and then there are ebooks. So, your take on this thing?
Yeah. So I have taught a course on online mode already, and the experience is nothing like, not only for me, even for the students, the experience was nothing like the real physical classes. In fact, it was interesting to see that first 10 sessions were delivered in a physical classroom, and last 10 sessions of the same course were delivered in the online mode, and the experience was vastly different. So, however, the online mode is here to stay, primarily because for the first time out of compulsion, we have shifted to the online mode of examination and of classroom delivery and so on. And as a result of that, we have kind of developed some kind of affinity, which was so far a hindrance in adoption of the online technologies of this nature. However, the online will not be the immediate future. In the long run, what I see is, in the long run, that is about 1 to 2 years period, what I see is that although the physical classrooms will be back, there will always be a mix of, let's say that mix can be 50-50, that mix can be 40-60 in any direction, but it will be a mix of physical classroom and online classroom. And it will not be just unilateral, full physical or full online classrooms, particularly in the higher education and in non-laboratory kind of classes. It is bound to be a mix of some physical and a lot of online mode of teaching. Uh, the good thing in that is that so far everybody had to come all the way to those campuses, to those places that need that resource intensive way of education, might reduce, and that might reduce the cost of education also, and may distribute the educational distribution in the society a lot better, particularly in the non-technical domains, non-science, non-laboratory kind of domains. Yes.
Thank you,
Sumit?
sir. So, sir, I think we're now running short of time. So, sir, I'll request you to s- some sort of advice for our participants before we conclude this
Ah,
on economic lines.
yeah, so advices, and see, free advice costs you nothing unless you use it. So all I can say is that try to make best of this opportunity of these remaining days of lockdown in gaining some skill and insisting on skills. Save your resources and spend them carefully. Don't think that government will have a magic wand and one fine morning everything will be fine. This crisis may last longer than what we may be prepared for and anticipate for. So try to be as good social and human being as possible. And if you have money, distribute it so that others also have money, because economy works on the distribution of money, not holding of money. And if you have more than necessary, the best thing would be to give it to an economist. My contact details are there on the screen. You are welcome.
Perfect, sir. Sir, this was a very insightful session, and I think all the participants would agree with me here. Their messages in the chat box also tell us that. And thank you, sir. And I would also thank the participants here for asking such wonderful questions.
Thanks to everyone, and thanks to you, Sumit, also for conducting this so smoothly.
You're welcome, sir. And yes, so participants will we'll be uploading a recording of this webinar on our Oxford University Press India Facebook page tomorrow 4 p.m. You can watch the recording. You can also let your colleagues and your students, friends know about it. And also we'll be sharing a YouTube link of the same recording. So that also you can watch and share with your fellow colleagues. So thank you again, and I'm really sorry if we couldn't take your question. You can always write back to us, and then we'll get back to you on that question.
Sure.
Thank you again,
And
sir.
just one last
Yes, sir.
word. If I have not been able to answer some of your questions, you are please welcome to mail those directly to me. I'll try to answer as best as I can, although given my limited capability, whatever I can, I'll try. Right? Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Take care.